All right. Hi. I'm gonna. This is my third attempt at trying to record this. One, I got interrupted. The other one, I ran out of time. I have a 15-minute time limit on this particular program, so I'm gonna try to keep track of my time and not get lost this time. So this is what we'll talk about as we talked about during the web conference. I'll have a link each week to this Prezi that I'll be building each week, so that at the end of the term you have an entire one single presentation that covers all the major points of the chapters of the text. And then you'll have each week a link that'll be a recording of me doing just that week's portion of the text. So without further ado, let's start galloping through this. And I know it doesn't look like there's a lot of space on here, but believe it or not, I will talk it up for a long time. So chapter 1, human resource function. So I think one of the things that's really critical for us to understand and think about as we enter into this class is the fact that the human resource function of a school district is so complex. There's so many parts and pieces and so many things that we don't really think about. So, clearly the human resource department, human resource function is to hire and fire people. There's no doubt about that. That is definitely one of the key features and functions of the department. But the fact of the matter is that there's a host of other things that happen out of the human resource department. Human resources are responsible for benefits. So if you're hiring a vendor for health insurance, for dental insurance, for vision insurance, if you are a self-funded insurance system and have a third-party vendor that you're working with, it would be the human resource personnel at the district, along with maybe teacher association representation, that would be a part of deciding who those vendors were and entering into those contracts. If you have retirement systems beyond the state teacher retirement program, you would be the person responsible for those things. But we're not talking about just teachers when we talk about the human resource function. We're talking about custodians and maintenance workers and bus drivers and cafeteria workers and secretaries. And each of them could have their own collective bargaining agreement, or each of them have their own sets of evaluation procedures, and you're in charge of all of those kinds of things when you're overseeing the human resource functions. So this is a lot. This is a really big space. It's far and away, education is a human-intensive industry. So we typically see 80 to 85% of a school's operating budget going towards certified staff, teachers, principals, counselors. When we talk about their salaries and their benefits, we're most always over 80% of the entire budget. That doesn't include salaries and benefits for bus drivers, custodians, maintenance workers, cafeteria workers, and secretaries, right? So it's a huge portion of the budget. And then, the thing that I like for us to realize and understand is that we don't often go to our school board and ask them to give us $1 million. But when we ask the school board to hire a 22-year-old first-year teacher with the mindset that that teacher is going to remain at the school district for their entire career, if they were to do that, by the time we added up their salary over their entire career and our portion, the district's portion of their benefits in retirement over the course of their entire career, we're well over $1 million. And that doesn't even include facilities and equipment and technologies and all those kinds of things. So this is a major investment. So we need to be thinking very seriously about how we are protecting the district's $1 million investment, and how we are developing to maximize what we get in return for that kind of investment. And it's really what we do in human resources that determines that. And that's an important thing for us to think about and look at. The text talks about environmental factors. There's those external factors where there's regulations. And a regulation that I think is an important one to think about, and one that I, again, have some personal experience with, is classified staff. So there have been cases in which school districts have been sued So there was a secretary. She'd worked at the school district for 20 years. Um, as the as some tough budget times came, it was time. Her position was actually eliminated. In looking at what was happening, she could document and prove that the district had regularly asked her to work 50, 55-hour work weeks. And there's a regulation for classified staff that if they are required to work more than 40 hours, that they have access to overtime pay. And we don't we again, for us as administrators or teachers, we don't think about the fact that we work 50, 60, 70 hours a week at times, day and night. But for these classified staff, there's regulations that protect them in that regard. And the result is that this secretary was able to bring an unfair labor practice suit in which the district was found responsible for paying her for back wages of overtime that they had not paid her. So in the districts that I worked in, we were working very hard to get really intentional about the ways in which we made sure we protected ourselves from those kinds of occurrences. So there's those kinds of regulations. And obviously there's contract regulations, the economics. What is the state share of instruction? How's the state's funding formula operating? Did we pass that operations levy? That operations levy failed, so now what does that mean for us as far as how we are going to operate as a district? And clearly there are technologies in place. Are there certain functions of the HR process that maybe we can automate or outsource in ways because of technology that previously we couldn't, that have these kinds of factors? Technology is requiring new kinds of reporting potentially that we have to produce. Internally, there's things like the way we're formally organized as an organization. Then there's these groups that we work with, and that may be unions, that may be just dynamics within a particular building. Then we have individual behaviors. That I've had superintendents that before I hired a teacher as a principal, I had to make sure that candidate had an interview with the superintendent, because the superintendent wanted to say they had engaged with the candidate before they went to the school board for hiring. I've had other superintendents that didn't feel that way. So there's individual behaviors that are impacts in the way the HR function actually works. Other major considerations, ethical considerations, right? We are dealing with humans. This is a human industry, and so we need to think about the way in which we're behaving and make sure that we're behaving in fair ways to all parties. And then there's organizational structures and functions, right? So again, the structural arrangements, have we engaged in kind of site-based management that have things spread out? Are we still really centrally focused in the central office? Strategic planning and organizational goals. And this is my last example that I'll give, and I'm sure I've flown through this in about half the time that I did last time. So, but let me tell you this story and see if I could get it done in 7 minutes or so, 6 or 7 minutes. So, I became principal of a very large suburban school district. We were growing. We were about 15, on our way to 1,500 students at the time. And the district had just made a decision that we were going to stay with one high school, that our growth projections and our budgetary constraints did not afford us the option to look to go to 2 high schools. And one of our concerns about staying with one high school was that there would be reduced opportunities for students to be affiliated and associated with the schools. We weren't going to, the show choir wasn't going to get bigger. The basketball team wasn't going to get bigger. We weren't going to add another football team. The student council might have gotten a little bit bigger, but it wasn't going to get that much bigger. So how were we going to, as we increased in students, and yet the opportunities weren't necessarily, the traditional opportunities weren't increasing, how are we going to make sure that we helped kids maintain their affiliation with their schools? Because we knew that was important, and we knew that was part of our tradition of who we were as a school. And so what I did as the principal was, at the end of my first year of being principal, is I made a pitch to the superintendent and the school board to add another assistant principal. And this assistant principal's sole responsibility and job was to oversee and coordinate all of those kinds of extracurriculars. Now, there were other things that he did, but ultimately the athletic director reported directly to this assistant principal, and all the club and activity sponsors, and he helped organize and facilitate and make sure that everything was happening in those kinds of ways. So when student council wanted to put on a dance, they went through him. When a group of students came and said, we'd like to start a new organization, a new club, they went to him, and he helped facilitate those things. We made that HR decision to invest our money in another administrative position because we were going to have fidelity to our goals and our planning. And so when we act in those ways, I think we have a better kind of function and understanding of what we ought to be doing with HR. But that required us to be really clear about who we were. And the book talks about mission and getting clear about what the mission of the school is, and then HR decisions falling out of that kind of consideration. So again, if we say our mission is to have kids have, every kid to have at least one post-secondary education type of learning experience prior to graduation, and we only have one AP course and no dual credit options and no agreements around online course taking, or haven't really been pressing on how we can get kids into certifying programs at the career centers, we're going to make some we're going to make some curricular decisions and some other kinds of instructional planning decisions that then lead to human resource decisions. And so those things ought to be in alignment, and it's the HR person's responsibility to make sure that they are a part of those conversations and thinking about how down the road they're being in alignment with those kinds of missions. So those are the things that I definitely wanted to hit this week around chapter 1, and enjoy.